everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Mike Suleiman here with South Jersey Forward, a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank and advocacy organization. Joining you twice in 1 week. We had a lovely roundtable Monday on the state of local media in Southern New Jersey. Appreciate our panelists for a great, thoughtful discussion there, and happy to have another equally thoughtful and engaging discussion tonight on the role of the Department of Community Affairs in the city of Atlantic City. A lot of folks, hear DCA, that acronym. Don't really sure what it means. You hear takeover, intervention, a lot of stuff in the media, or frankly, not a whole lot of stuff that you're hearing in the media. So I want to educate folks on the role of DCA in the city of Atlantic City, how the state fits into the governance of and forward-moving progress in Atlantic City, and obviously the future of Atlantic City, which I think is important on everybody's mind. I think, D or R aside, we're all focused on making Atlantic City in Southern New Jersey a better place. So I'm very delighted to have two great panelists with us this evening. First, Jacqueline Suarez is the Director of the Division of Local Government Services at the Department of Community Affairs. Jacqueline has a long history in public service, spending years at the DLGS acronym. Sorry for messing that up, Jacqueline. Prior to that, Jacqueline served in the governor's office, also worked in DCA as a liaison to the legislature. Also a practicing attorney, formerly attorney, went to Rutgers Camden Law. So you're a South Jersey person, Jacqueline. Appreciate that for joining us. And then obviously joining her is the senior advisor for Atlantic City Affairs, Chris Brown. We'll probably run out of time going through Chris's accolades. Former state senator, assemblyman, Army veteran, municipal court judge. And I was telling Chris before we got on the break that it's funny, a mutual friend of ours texted us and said, I can't believe it, Suleiman and Brown doing a live stream together. But, Chris and I have always had a great relationship, a lot of mutual respect. And again, Chris, really appreciate you facilitating this and making this a great discussion. So thank you.
I got to tell you, Mike, real quickly, I appreciate you and I appreciate your concern for not just Atlantic City, but Atlantic County. And we love what you're doing here with this, I guess I'll call it a podcast. And I think it's great. And the more people know, the better. And we're very fortunate now that people are listening. You and I talked about a little bit in private, but to have the director of the DLGS here with us tonight shows the commitment that she has and the governor and the lieutenant governor have to Atlantic City. I mean, remember, she put in a full day and now she's doing this because it's the right thing to do and she wants to do it. And so we appreciate you, Mike, and we appreciate what you're doing.
Well, we appreciate you, Chris, and thank you both. And everybody who's watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. Love to check those out while we're having a lovely discussion. But I want to kick it off to you, Jacqueline. So obviously, DCA, folks know, is one of the state departments. Obviously, the head of the DCA is Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver. But your division, of which you're the head, the Division of Local Government Services, what is that, and what are the roles and responsibilities overall of that division?
Sure. So, the Division of Local Government Services, we're obviously within the Department of Community Affairs. And I think sometimes people use those two either acronyms, alphabet soup, or titles interchangeably. But essentially, the division was created to provide technical and financial assistance. And that's really for budgeting, financial reporting, joint services, purchasing. And we've really expanded that now into also management issues. And that's for all municipalities across the city of New Jersey. So as a division, we oversee the budgets of 564 municipalities, 21 counties, hundreds of fire districts and authorities. We also provide technical assistance to all local governments, and that has to do with their management in any facet of government, right? So that could be financial in nature, that could be procurement, that could be assistance with business administration, that could be for policing, fire, EMS, DPW, you name it, we'll assist. And we also license and certify all of the professionals in each locality. And then our local assistance bureau, or the lab as we call it, also oversees all of the transitional aid program. And that's any kind of funding for fiscally distressed municipalities in exchange for greater oversight of their finances and operations. And then the lab also provides technical assistance and grant funding for shared service initiatives across all levels of state government and local governments. So that just kind of gives you a flavoring for just the breadth that the division really handles. And then the legislature also put the Municipal Stabilization and Recovery Act under DLGS. And that's where we have a greater involvement with Atlantic City in particular.
Well, you are busier than a one-armed paper hanger, I'll tell you, Jacqueline. But that's a good segue. So, as you pointed out, so in 2016, I believe it was, the Municipal Stabilization Recovery Act was signed. MISRA, I think, as some folks say in the media. So, and you hear it colloquially in the media, takeover, intervention, what have you. What exactly did that law say as it pertains to Atlantic City?
So trying to distill it or kind of boil it down, I guess, to what makes the most sense, because it's a pretty lengthy statute itself. But
Sure.
under MISRA, once a municipality is deemed, and these are kind of the two most important terms, right? In need of stabilization and recovery. And then the local finance board, which is in the Division of Local Government Services, they pretty much determine that. And then it essentially says that then we could assume and reallocate to and vest exclusively within the director, which I currently serve in that role, any of the functions, powers, privileges, immunities of the governing body of that municipality. So what does this mean? Essentially, it's just that the director can take any steps to stabilize the finances, restructure the debts, assist in the financial rehabilitation and recovery of any municipality deemed in need of stabilization and recovery, which Atlantic City was in 2016. And then, so that includes things like renegotiating union contracts, hiring and firing of employees, selling city assets, reversing decisions of city council. So that kind of distills it, in a very quick way of what MISRA provides DLGS as far as authority over Atlantic City.
So, Chris, I want to kick it over to you. Obviously, you're the senior advisor for Atlantic City Affairs, and Jacqueline did a great job of kind of outlining what's in the legislation or what's in the law, statute rather. But taking it to the practical level, obviously, you're the local guy or gal on the ground, local person. What do you see as that's what's in the statute versus the practical day-to-day of how does that translate to your role and your experiences in the city, working with the various stakeholders to help the city in need of however it was defined, in need of rehabilitation?
Well, you have to remember under Governor Christie, it was more of an outsider coming in and just dictating what's going to happen and how it's going to be laid out. And under Governor Murphy, he has a different approach. And he said it from the beginning that he doesn't want a Bigfoot Atlantic City, so it has to be a partnership. Well, if you're going to be a partnership, then it's helpful to have somebody who was born and raised there and had his family on the island for over 100 years to put all of the pieces together, build the consensus that is necessary, and move together as a team. And I can tell you that we're very fortunate with the director and the DLGS team that I'm fortunate to work with, that when we work together and when we listen to each other and when we pick different items and move them forward, it's done much more smoothly. It's done as a team effort as opposed to, somebody telling somebody what to do. And that's a tribute to the lieutenant governor, a tribute to the governor, and a tribute to Director Suarez for taking that approach. But you need somebody, what they've learned on the ground, is actually here and understands the people and has an idea of the politics. And one of the things, Michael, that you and I, our friendship has prevailed is because although we belong to different parties, we've always understood that we can respect our differences, and we've also understood that we share a common goal. And all that you're trying to do, that the DLGS is trying to do, that we're trying to do, is make Atlantic City a place where people can live, work, and visit and feel safe, and it's clean, and it's an environment that we can continue to bring development and move it forward. And so I can tell you that there have been quite a few things under the direction of Director Suarez that have been implemented. You mentioned one city stat, and I'm sure the director could talk to you about that. That is nothing but a win, big win for the city and the residents. But without the DLGS, that doesn't happen. And without somebody building the consensus so we're all agreeing and moving in the same direction, it probably doesn't happen either.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned just a funny story that I remember under Governor Christie that he had a couple summits at CRDA office with the emergency managers, the Kevins, and just I remember, obviously the bigwigs like Chris were there, but I remember waiting 3 hours and twiddling your thumbs with the media because all hell was breaking loose inside, or the top-down approach to your point, Chris. And I think it's a lot more of a collaborative approach. And I think especially with the city stat, where you've got community input, folks, the community advisory boards and things of that nature. But that's a good segue into. In 2018, the administration commissioned Jim Johnson, who was known in New York City public policy and I think back there now, to commission a report. And I would ask either one of you, it really made a lot of press and buzz, that report. And really, it seemed to me, as a layperson, it gave a roadmap to the administration for the future of Atlantic City. Talk to us about that report, the impact, and if it still guides the division's work today. For either one of you, or both.
I can start it off if you okay. So one of the things, Mike, I remember when they first sent Jim Johnson down, I said to the governor, I said, it's wonderful that you're sending somebody down, and as opposed to who was the attorney who came from the Christie administration who built about $8 million?
The Chiesa firm?
The Chiesa law firm.
Jeff,
I said to the governor, I said, look, this guy's awesome. He's going to come down here and he's going to do it, and it's just going to be $1 that he gets paid, and he cares, and he wants to see things happen. But you and I both know his ability to really encapsulate everything that's needed in the city is difficult in a 5-month period. But I give him nothing but credit for the attempts that he made and the report that he put together. And within the report, the things that have been carried out are, like you just mentioned, the advisory committee. And one of the things that he saw was that the residents of the city should have more input into what's happening. And to Lieutenant Governor's credit, she has chaired, for the most part, this committee where they have all of the stakeholders get together and they discuss what the future is and what is happening. And at the same point, he identified the food diet, and nobody has worked harder than the governor and the lieutenant governor to try to make sure that there is a supermarket. And then unfortunately, in the private sector, sometimes people get a little greedy and they overreach. And it was just something that became untenable for the taxpayer and the people who live here. And so they're still on the front burner. They're working very hard towards it. And the CRETA right now is taking the bids to find if there's another way to make this happen. And this is your old boss, Jim Whalen, when he first opened a supermarket in Atlantic City. It was in that plaza. And unfortunately, it didn't pan out over time. But if we're going to open a supermarket because we believe there's a food desert, it seems to make more sense to me not to build a brand new one behind the convention center when you already have the infrastructure for another one. And I know that the owner of that supermarket has been working with the CRETA, and he's going to give a bid. I don't know if his bid will win out or it won't win out. But at the same time, part of the problem is a liquor store and some of the people that hang out at that location. So there's an opportunity, thanks to the lieutenant governor and the governor and the director still making this a priority, that you may be able to accomplish this and clean up the area at the same time. So the Jim Johnson report was an excellent outline, a nice sketch of issues that he identified. But people have been talking about this, Mike, for 20 years, clean and safe. And those are 100,000-foot words. What do they mean? And I can tell you that working with the DLGS, if you're talking about safe, you start with your own infrastructure, and the police department, with the director's knowledge and the bureau chief's knowledge as a former chief, and now they have another chief who's down here also working within the city to implement that and make it better. So that's the Johnson plan, and it's been followed in many ways, and there's always work that needs to be done.
Yeah, and to that point, Jacqueline, what I liked about the Jim Johnson report is that it was ambitious yet realistic. And I think if you look at even some of the recommendations, it wasn't just external. Well, this should happen in Atlantic City. It was really internal too, about, hey, we should make planning a little easier and have CRDA and city planning in one office to make it the ability to expedite work and things like that, and retrain city employees and all that sort of stuff. So how important is it to not only be a conduit of DCA, be a conduit to change things, beyond the control of City Hall, but also change things within the mechanisms of City Hall to make Atlantic City a better place and a more well-run, continue to be a more well-run government?
Yeah, so I think there's many facets to answering that question, right? So first being the main priority under MISRA when we first came into Atlantic City was triage, right? So we had to just stem the flow of the bleeding, right? We just had to conquer that. And I think we finally stabilized the finances of the city between looking at the pilots, between looking at the casino, tax appeals. And now that that's been accomplished, now we get to kind of focus our attention elsewhere. And that's on all the other facets of government that are going to both contribute to better services for the residents, as well as attracting more businesses to Atlantic City. So those are things like, what are our biggest money makers, and what are also our biggest expenditures in the city? So obviously public safety is just the biggest budget of every municipality across the state of New Jersey. So first took a look at that. Also, public safety ties into it, much like the senator was mentioning, clean and safe, right? So if you are not considered clean and safe, then you're not going to attract the best investment opportunities for the city. So that's another avenue that we've really taken a look at, and that's economic development in the city, whether that's Bader Field, whether that is targeting specific areas of the city itself. We brought in ways to kind of help build capacity within the city. That's a phrase that we use pretty frequently. And what we were looking there is, what should change? What should we bolster when it comes to the planning office, the economic development office, and how do we kind of cut through some of that red tape, right? Because Atlantic City has to deal with DEP at the state level. They have to deal with CRETA. You have to deal with the city administration as well. And so every time we get somebody who's interested in the city and developing in the city, they kind of say, well, I just jumped through that hoop. What do you mean I've got 2 more hoops to jump through? So how do we streamline that process a bit more to not only make Atlantic City attractive, but to make it so that if somebody comes in and wants to develop, it's not 3 years down the road until we can finally break ground? So we've been kind of working through that. And, the senator has been really instrumental in making sure that we've been able to do that in some of the, with some of the developers most recently in the city, to kind of make sure that everybody's communicating effectively, both at the state level and the city level, as well as some of the state agencies. And I think that's where we're kind of focusing a lot of our attention now, because some of the big items have been stabilized, like the budget. We've been able to kind of focus now on how do we keep that momentum going, because we all know that it's only going to be revenues and tax ratables that are going to continue to bring the city out of any kind of financial distress.
Yeah, and you mentioned that about kind of bringing everybody. Oh, go ahead, Chris, please.
I was just going to piggyback off of that. A couple of things. Through the director's leadership, an advisor has been brought on board through the state. The state's paying. And again, I'm going to refer back to your old boss, Stuart Weiser. And Stuart Weiser was the head of planning and development back when Senator Whalen was the mayor. And so to find somebody who has that kind of knowledge and history of the city to help the director, Jacques, who is awesome. He does a great job. But the other thing that the director has done is expanded the planning and development office. And what's unfortunate is finding somebody who can work at a certain rate is very difficult. You have to pay somebody astronomically to come in and actually sit in City Hall and be a planner or developer. But working with the leadership of working with the city too, the BA, Anthony Swan, and the director, Stuart was brought in, and now they've been able to hire other firms to help weed through all of the applications and to make sure that they're getting a fair look. It's being looked at quickly and it's being looked at competently. I can also tell you through the leadership of the director, when I first got there a few years ago, the zoning board was not fully manned. The planning board was not fully manned. And one of the first priorities was to make sure that we got the resumes, that the people who were recommended would do a good job. And both of those boards are never going to be canceled due to a lack of a quorum. Well, that was something where the state's working with the city in talking about planning and development to make sure that it moves forward.
No, I think that's that's really excellent stuff, and I think that it's going to sound bad or not correct how I say this, but could that be a model for other municipalities of kind of streamlining their services, where it's if somebody wants to develop and contribute to the economy, it's not like jumping through hoops, especially in a city like Atlantic City. As you all know, you've got the DEP, you've got CAFRA. I mean, it's can be a pain in the butt sometimes. Not that we're big environmentalists, but obviously want to make it as smooth as possible. So Chris is laughing, but to your point, Jacqueline, you talk about kind of both of you talk about bringing folks together. I know one of the things that was created pursuant to the Johnson Report and MISRA is the Atlantic City Executive Council, kind of bringing different folks together. I think last I read it meets on a quarterly basis. So talk about that Executive Council, what that entails, who's part of that, and how has it been managing external stakeholders? Because oftentimes it seems like everybody's got an idea, and sometimes people fight pride of authorship with different ideas. So how is it maybe sometimes a full-time job getting the different voices together of the consensus of here's our vision, here's how we're going to take it forward?
Sure. So I think this goes back to, and I certainly welcome the senator's comments on this too, because he's kind of seen it through its evolution. So what was always made clear to me was Atlantic City is not only a priority to Lieutenant Governor, but also to the governor. And we saw part of that through the Jim Johnson report. And so I think the Atlantic City Executive Council has kind of evolved a little bit throughout that time frame since the initial creation of the Jim Johnson report, talking about how important it was to ensure that the stakeholders who are Atlantic City are included in all of these conversations. Because like you mentioned before with Jim Johnson, we did not want to bring somebody into the city of Atlantic City who wasn't familiar with the city, who didn't understand what was going on with the city, and just say, this is what's worked somewhere else that I've been. We're going to just take this map, stick it on top of Atlantic City and make it work. We wanted to kind of understand the inner workings of the city and the stakeholders and all of the important facets that make the city run and unique as Atlantic City. And so, then in the Atlantic City Executive Council kind of came to fruition, brought about people from the universities, brought from the schools, brought from Atlantic Care, the healthcare system, made sure that we incorporated individuals at the city administration level, looked at the, those providers also from the electric. I think there was gas. We brought in everybody from around the area to talk through systems from how do we generate interest in development? How do we make sure that we're creating educational platforms for students that are going to raise them up so that way they're not always just looking at the casinos and some of the lower level paying jobs, but some of the more industrious, inventive, STEAM type endeavors. How do we kind of do that? And I think that was the whole goal behind this, was to approach every facet within Atlantic City, right? Not just focusing on the finances, not just focusing on homelessness, but focusing on all facets of life in Atlantic City to kind of move the city forward. But Senator Brown, I definitely welcome your thoughts and how this has evolved over the years.
Well, I think you nailed it. I think that pretty much covers it. And, it's always smart if you're in a leadership role to listen to everybody and to build a consensus. And that goes back to the governor and lieutenant governor, whereas the prior administration was just going to tell you how it's going to be. And this administration has put together this group as described by the director. to do just that, to make it a team collaboration. And I think it has been much more effective because of that.
So let me ask you, Chris, and you probably laugh when I ask this, but you're the senior advisor for Atlantic City Affairs. God only knows what your week must look like. But take us through, I don't even want to call it an average week, right? Because you probably you ping pong from events. But what is an average week for being the point person on the ground in the city? What is an average week? Is it events with or meetings with city officials? Is it events with constituents? The city stat, going to council? What? You probably do a lot of interfacing with the public, but what does that look like? Just the average week of somebody in your position.
Well, when it comes to interfacing with the public, I honestly don't do a lot of that. And part of that is because my role is, as I see it, is to let the people who are elected to interface with the public. If there's a councilman or the mayor or anybody for that matter who has an event, I'll actually try not to go to it because I don't want to distract from what they're trying to accomplish and the message they're trying to send. One of the things you have to be very careful is, as Mike, you'll understand this, there are a lot of egos and a lot of personalities that you have to deal with. And so the more low key you can be and just let people know that you're there and I'm willing to help, just let me know and I'll do it, tends to be the best way to actually accomplish anything. But I can tell you throughout the week, I interact with the BA to department heads. I'll give you an example. Today, we had a meeting. It was with Atlanticare, the county prosecutor, the county sheriff, the director Barnes of Health and Human Services, Atlanticare, Chief Sarkis. And this is all, now mind you, this isn't my meeting. This is something that is directed by the DLGS and through the governor and lieutenant governor, but to build a consensus on how we can provide better services and get our homeless population off of the street. At the same time, it's with the understanding that Mr. Callahan, who is the director of homelessness in the state, I'll just be quite frank. The more money I can get for the state to spend here in Atlantic City, the happier I am. And so bringing smart people together to come up with a plan so that we can try and get the money is what I try to do as best I can. I can tell you, if you've noticed, and this comes directly, this is about, you talk about the lieutenant governor and the governor and Director Suarez working together. I don't know if you've noticed, Mike, but through their efforts, have ambassadors on the boardwalk. They used to only be there 8:30 to 4:30. There was money dedicated to Chief Sarkis and the Class 2 officers, but unfortunately, no fault of anybody, just it's our country right now and the lack of interest in being officers. He couldn't fill it. So that money was redirected, and now you have 2 shifts of ambassadors, 8 to 3 and then 3 to 11. So you have them on the boardwalk that amount of time. So if I'm a tourist, I feel safer, I feel better. In addition to that, with the direction of the director and the lieutenant governor, we tied in casino security so that their uniforms match the ambassador's uniforms. So it's a force multiplier. And on top of that, through the work and getting the approval, and this is one of those monetary things where the director had to look at it and make sure financially it was okay, agreed an overtime schedule. So you have police working an entire shift on the boardwalk. That's Brian Shapiro calling me as we speak. We have an entire shift working on the boardwalk with the extra ambassadors, with the casino security. And so that was something where you talk about the DLGS getting involved in what does safe mean? Well, they looked at our infrastructure and they exponentially improved it. And so, that's an example. What do you do? The lights. Mike, there are so many different things, as you can imagine. And one of the things, you try to be very careful. I want to make it very clear that none of these are team accomplishments. It has to work with the mayor has to work with the BA, has to work with the governor, the lieutenant governor, the director, and building those consensuses can take some energy. But we've been able to do it on quite a few things, and you just quietly go about what you do, and you hope that it makes a difference.
Now, look, managing personalities is a skill, and I think you have it, Chris, and you do, Jacqueline, because sometimes it's not even about the policy, the procedures. It's this one didn't hold the door open for me at the party, and I'm going to hold a grudge for 5 and screw that person. It happens, right? It's life. I mean, there's small p politics everywhere, but I think to your point, clearly clean and safe. We hear that, but getting the foot traffic. Obviously we had the National Governors Association. The air show is going to bring in 500,000 people, and having that safe foot traffic. We got the big water park at Showboat now. The safe foot traffic on the boardwalk, making sure people feel comfortable, and hopefully getting that on the streets too. Obviously you have the walk, but the city's 48 blocks. You could walk from one end to the other if you really wanted to. You might be sweating a little bit, but it's a small enough city where you want neighborhoods impacted and neighborhoods affected in a positive way. And I'm glad I was at an event not too long ago with the lieutenant governor where she, to her credit, talked about the non-tourist district neighborhoods like back Maryland and these other spots that have been historically neglected. But it's like, well, why? I mean, why are they neglected, and why aren't we doing something about it? So I think a holistic approach, that this administration is doing, and hopefully future administrations, right? We're an apolitical think tank here. Hopefully the next governor, DR, will continue that, at least some sort of partnership with Atlantic City. But, we mentioned earlier about the city stat meetings. I know this is a concept that came up, when Baltimore pioneered this, many years ago. But, Jacqueline, talk to us about these city stat meetings, what that is, and, if you've seen a positive benefit. It seems like there has been a positive benefit to the city and this kind of whole notion of clean and safe.
Yeah, so happy to. This, as you mentioned, really was the brainchild out of Baltimore. And we took a look to see how we might be able to replicate it because they had great success. And the whole premise behind it is when you have residents who come and whether it's make a complaint or want to highlight something that they don't like or they think is wrong or they would like some attention brought to it, a lot of times when you call up the city, you don't know where you're supposed to be directing these types of issues to. And so City Stat kind of takes out the guessing game of that. So the way that City Stat is set up, the way that it works and has been operating in Atlantic City is that all the directors for every department within the city come. The BA actually kind of like moderates it, for lack of a better term, right? He kind of just runs the meeting. And then the city attorneys are also there. And what happens is the residents, when they come there and they bring up something, they can now figure out who it should be shepherded through by. And sometimes it's multifaceted. So if you say, you've got a dilapidated building on your street and maybe it is attracting people who are doing potentially illegal things, that's not just one department. That's not just one director. So now you've got the ability for the police department to look into it to see what kind of potentially illegal activities going on there. You've got the Health and Human Services to see if there are any potentially homeless populations who are residing there. You also have the codes office there to kind of look at, is it a dilapidated building? Should it be deemed abandoned, unsafe structure? Should we be taking it down? Should we be citing the owner of that building? So now you've got a multifaceted approach to make sure that we're addressing all of the quality of life issues that are going on in that neighborhood. And then the beauty of City Stat is that once it's addressed, then the directors have to talk about how they're going to address it and then actually update the residents at the next City Stat meeting as to what they've done to address the issue. And so it's a way to kind of hold everybody accountable and also highlight the successes of how the city's responding to their residents. And then it also allows the residents to feel heard and for them to actually see how their concerns are being addressed by the city officials. So it's really been a win-win across the board because we get to highlight the good work of the city's employees and address all of the issues that are brought by the residents themselves. So, and I think Senator Brown was filling me in on today's city stat and said, 15 different residents were there. And from what I've heard from the residents in my attending of city stat meetings, from what I've heard from the city officials, from the employees, and what I've seen in the papers, it's really been considered a success for the city, and something that we certainly want to replicate across other cities in New Jersey, because it seems to just be a win-win.
When do the city stat meetings occur? Are they weekly, bi-weekly? When are they?
They are weekly, and then what ends up happening is we've been rotating, and what we've been kind of looking at is what makes the most sense for the residents, right? Because we have some shift workers, we have some normal 9-to-5ers, and we wanted to make sure that everybody can get to a city stat meeting. So we've actually been rotating through them. Some of them are held during the day, some of them are held during the evening, and we rotate that every other meeting to ensure that we can hear all the residents at what works for them.
Yeah, Chris, what have your experiences been? Obviously, you attend pretty much all of these, and I think that's good to move it around, because if you're a casino worker working from 3 to midnight, a morning would be good. But if you're a mom, you got 9 to 5, you can't do a morning meeting. So I think moving those around is good. And how's the partnership been on the city stat meetings with the community? Because as you know, the city has a vibrant, a very vocal group of neighborhood associations, in a good way, vocal neighborhood associations, and a lot of tight knit groups and neighborhoods. And you've got to talk to all of them, because if you don't talk to them, you don't engage them, they're going to engage you. So how has it been dealing with the folks at the city stat meetings?
I think it has been going really well. And I will tell you another thing that was implemented through the leadership of, the governor's vision, the lieutenant governor, and Director Suarez, is this see it, click it, fix it aspect. And with see it, click it, fix it, it is now an app that anyone who's a citizen can download onto their phone, and you just follow the prompts. It's easy to do. And even if you do see it, click it, fix it, and then you show up at a city stat meeting, you can ask about what you submitted, and you can make sure that it went to the right place and the right person. And that's just another example. And I can tell you, like today, the director is correct. There were about 15 people who spoke, but there were about 30 people in the audience. And you are correct, Mike. If you're a city that is responsive to its residents, then you shouldn't hide. And you should be willing to put all of your directors out there on display, because if you appointed them, they're competent, they're well-spoken, and they're going to try to get the job done. And I can tell you that, to the mayor's credit and to the director's credit, they meet the test. And each one, if it's a new complaint, they write it down, and by the next meeting, and sometimes they're every week, but often they'll be every other week, and they do rotate through a morning and an afternoon. And that's just one more thing. Think about it, Mike. The mayor is committed enough to make sure that the citizens are heard, that he's taking his administration and putting them out there in the evening for his constituents to ask questions. And so that's a credit to the mayor, that's a credit to the administration, and of course the DLGS for giving the direction and the guidance to make it a reality.
It's funny. I always have to remind folks, working in state government for a while, we're sometimes in the bubble. I say respectfully, all of us are in the bubble, and the average person doesn't make a distinction, let's say, between city responsibility, state responsibility, creator responsibility. Their feeling is that there's a problem and you're the government, fix it. And I think, to everybody's point on this conversation, we get out of whose responsibility it is, and we just get something done, and you get everybody in the room, and here's the problem, who's going to fix it? Okay, you fix it, boom, and move on. I think that makes sense for everybody, because I've seen, not in Atlantic City, just in general, that you go to a county commissioner meeting, oh no, you talk to the city, say, oh no, you got to talk to this one. People don't want to hear that. People don't have time to deal with that. They pay a lot of money in taxes. I know we all do on this round table. Get the stuff done, and let's move forward. So
Mike,
I know we got a few more minutes. Please.
I'll throw some notes to you about the responsiveness and the direction of the DLGS. You can attend through Zoom as well. So, although they've divided up in the morning and the evening, if you can't get to Stockton, you can Zoom in. So they have really gone out of their way to make it accessible, and that's a program that I know that the director and others should feel very good about, because I know that every resident who gets up, they may have a complaint, but first they say, "Thank you for providing me this forum," and then they give you the complaint. So the procedure seems to be working quite well, and it's really a good policy.
That's great to know. So just looking at the future here, the MISRA was signed in 2016. It was extended in 2021, I think, for 4 years. So that means 2025, 2026, somewhere in there. DCA, at least direct oversight, is going to sunset. But looking at that time, not asking you all to make policy or step ahead of your respective leaders in state government, but where do you see the role of DCA post MISRA intervention takeover? What do you want to call it? Is it going to be, to your point, Jacqueline, that it's like every other municipality where DCA plays a facilitatory role with helping local governments? Is it going to be a little more? Is it still going to be extraordinarily involved, not to the extent of MISRA, but maybe other big cities like a Newark or Jersey City or a Camden or a Union City that the DCA is involved in? Where do you see the role long term, post MISRA of where DCA is going to be in the city?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that also depends on the city itself, right? So there's lots of factors that are going to be taken into account. So it's how's everything working with the city and its officials? What does the economy itself look like? And those are some of the things that are outside of the city's control, for example. And I think everybody's always asked me, how do I view my role here? It's very similar to any of the transitional aid municipalities. And it is, I really see myself as the bumper rails on a bowling alley. And I'm just there to make sure we don't end up in the gutter. So, and that's kind of goes back to our conversation a little bit about making sure we build the capacity up. So do I think the state's going to completely step away in 5 years? I probably don't. And I say that for multiple reasons. Not just MISRA are we talking about here, but the state, Atlantic City is also under state supervision and also a transitional aid municipality. So that's 3 separate statutes that we touch on with Atlantic City, all through the Division of Local Government Services. So I know for one example is Asbury Park. They came out from underneath the transitional aid program about 1.5 years ago at this juncture. They stayed under some sort of state supervision, mostly because they wanted to for a little while. Many people like to be able to point to the state and say that's the reason you can't do something, or the state says no. So a lot of these governments actually prefer that we stick around for a little while longer, even well beyond us providing any kind of fiscal stability. And so I think that having some touch points on the city, just to make sure that whatever kind of structures and support we put into place over the last 7 years at this juncture don't completely fall away. So I think it just makes sense to slowly step away from it to make sure that the city continues to succeed over the next several decades. And we don't know what the market economy is going to do, right, over the next few years. And that's going to have a real impact on the city. That's outside of the officials' control directly. But as long as everybody's kind of doing what they're supposed to do and the economy moves in the right direction, I do see the state role continuing to lessen over time.
Yeah, and I think to your point, and to your point, Chris, obviously Asbury Park has really had a renaissance over the past 20, 30 years. I mean, it used to be mocked as just not a pleasant place, and it's lovely. It's great to have a bite to eat there, and a lot of folks vacationing there and living there and things like that. And but to your point with the economy, and Chris, in the legislature, you were the kind of the forefront authority on fighting the threat of North Jersey casinos in 2016. But look, for good or bad, actually bad for us. New York City casinos on the horizon. What, 2 years, 3 years? Is that going to have a negative impact, on Atlantic City? Now, the extent to which between now and then we can diversify the economy and keep things afloat, and the properties seem like they're doing well here. But it's in some respects I'm very positive about the outlook in Atlantic City, and frankly in other respects I'm not as positive. So how do you see things in 5 years?
Well,
only the easy questions, Chris.
Yeah. World hunger, I'll tackle next. Um, in the Army, when you go through different schools, they tell you to move with a sense of purpose. And if you're not moving very quickly, they tell you you're moving like pond water. So I try to bring some sort of sense of urgency that we are limited in our time before New York eventually opens up. And the extent to the damage that does, I'll let the pundits figure that out. But obviously, as a common sense person, it will affect us, and it's not going to be pleasant. So that being said, if you're aware that the bad guys are coming, then what do you do to prepare for it? And so I can tell you, for example, under the governor's leadership, when I was in the Senate, I voted against marijuana. I thought there were a lot of issues that were unresolved, but of course, being the government, we punted to the public and they voted it in. And now I am a great supporter because in our great town of Atlantic City, we have the opportunity to diversify our economy. Let me tell you an example of what you said before, and one of the things that we're lucky to have Director Suarez. One of the marijuana cannabis companies, and I don't know which one, there's several, but on Martin Luther King and Atlantic Avenue, they want to build a manufacturing. I think it's a Class 2 license. And the way it's set up, it's a little backwards in some respects because you have to get the land, you have to get the city approval. There's like 14 things you have to do that cost a lot of money. And then you hope that the state will actually give you your license. Well, this group already has successful businesses in Pennsylvania. They have, fortunately for them, the money and the wherewithal to move this project forward. They purchased the land on Martin Luther King and Atlantic Avenue. By the way, that land had been vacant for over 60 years, nothing. And now through this diversification of our economy, we have somebody investing millions. But guess what the state and everybody does along the way? First, they told them, we think there might be Indian bones or other bones of value, and we want you to do an archaeological dig. And so we, working with the DCA and working with the other government agency at the time who felt that there were bones that needed to be dug up, we were able to remediate that and they were able to move forward. But as quick as they did that, then they were told, well, it's a historical site. Mike, there's nothing there. They said it was a historical site. Well, what do you want them to save? The dirt? There's nothing there to preserve. But nonetheless, they were held up again for that. And most recently, but this is more of a legitimate thing, they pulled up 8 different oil tanks. One of them was an 8,000-pound tank, which still had, so they have to register that with the Department of Environmental Protection, and they're getting there. But the point is, there's serious business people who are serious about building and investing in Atlantic City. And if the cannabis industry, through the governor's vision of using it to rehabilitate and revitalize urban settings, we're lucky that Atlantic City was one. And that's just one that I'm talking about. And that's going to be a multi-million-dollar property that without the DCA, it's still stuck in neutral where they were 4 months ago, and they're progressing. At the same time, the water park, when you look at that water park, again, the DCA had to come in because nobody's fault, but there are so many rules and regulations, and a 10-pound kid has to have a 5-foot mat, and a 3-pound kid's got to have a 10-foot mat, and getting through that to be able to open on the 4th of July, that was something that the Lieutenant Governor and the director worked very hard to make sure that had a great opening. And I tell you, he's on to something, and some of the plans that he has. So is gaming in New York going to hurt? Of course. But, Atlantic City has a way of reinventing itself and of coming out from under. And if people, if nobody worries about who takes credit for something, we can get a lot done. And thus far, that has been the team approach from the director to the city. And, I stay optimistic, Mike. the glass to say a full Atlantic City is going to continue to be a destination resort long after, I'll say you're dead and buried.
There you go. Well, it was very well said. Final question for everybody, and I appreciate you all taking the time to chat with us. I certainly learned a lot. Must confess, half the stuff I didn't know, certainly about the app or the state supervision transitional aid. It's just a lot of fascinating stuff. But if you and your family are at Gilcrest having breakfast, either any of the Gilcrests in the city, you're talking to some regular Joes and Janes. What's one thing that you would want them to know about the role of DCA in Atlantic City? And I'll go first, and I'll just say that one thing I would hope the average Joe or Jane should know is that most of the work that gets done, you're not going to read about or see about, because I think it's obvious in this conversation that most of the work, you'll see the end result, but most of the work by the department and division goes unnoticed. It doesn't get picked up in the newspaper. It doesn't get read about on social media. You see the after effect. You don't see what kind of goes into that. So that would be my one thing. But if you're at Gilcrest or you're at Gino's getting a slice of pizza, you talk to somebody who's talking about Atlantic City, a resident, what's one thing you want them to know about DCA's role in the city?
I think it really ties into what you were talking about, Mike. It's just good government. Right. So we're kind of there under this guise of we don't actually want you to know that we're there. Right. Like that's kind of.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
To Senator Brown's point, like we're not there for the accolades. We're not there for the credit. We just want to make sure that things are running well. And so it's kind of like good garbage pickup. Nobody calls to tell the garbage guys that they're doing a good job, that their garbage disappeared overnight. They only call to tell them when something's wrong with it. And so we just want to be like the good garbage guys coming along, picking it up, making sure everything's running the way that it's supposed to run. So I think my quick 2-minute elevator speech to them would just be about good government, and if people in good government, it's usually that they don't know what's wrong until it does go wrong. And so we just want to keep it operating at a well-oiled machine level.
No, that's great. Chris, final word to you.
Well, if it's the final word, I'll say thank you, Michael, for what you're doing and putting it out there. Thank you, Director, for taking time out. And if we're going to ask what I would like people to know, I'd like them to know that you have a team of smart, hardworking professionals who understand that it has to be the politicians who get the credit, and that we're just here to make them look good. And the better they look, the better self-satisfaction we can get in a job well done. And that's basically it. You have people that they should know. There are people who care, who are dedicated to making their lives better. I mean, really, what's the function of government? It shouldn't be just to tax the hell out of you and beat you over the head. It should actually to help you and do some good things. And there are serious, intelligent people who are trying to make that happen.
Amen to that. Well, Chris Brown, Jacqueline Suarez, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate everybody tuning in. SouthJerseyForward.org. Please send us your thoughts, questions, concerns, ideas, good, bad, and different. Love to forward those along to our panelists. And please check out a city stat meeting. Go to nj.gov/DCA to learn more about the department and the division. And we'll see you at the next one. So,
thanks.